Welcome to another CEO Wisdom podcast. We have Daniel Hulme with us today. He's a Chief AI Officer at WPP, CEO at Satalia, Conscium. Altogether interesting guy, had a long career as an entrepreneur, speaker, he's an investor, and an EIR. A bunch of things that you're doing nowadays, Daniel. Tell me a bit more about yourself and what you're up to.
I wear multiple hats. Unfortunately, my day job is the Chief AI Officer for WPP. So I sold my company to WPP 3.5 years ago, and I coordinate AI across about 120,000 people. My job is to figure out how do we use AI to differentiate and marketing. I also still run my original company within WPP, which is a deep AI research company that applies it not only to marketing but also to industries way beyond marketing. I've just started a research company to solve machine consciousness, and I do a lot of public speaking, public engagement around the impact of AI on society. Oh, you're muted.
How did you first get in AI?
I guess when you're young and you ask questions about how does the universe work and what's the meaning of life and what's consciousness and can machines be conscious, you end up getting involved in sci-fi and things like that. So very early on asking these big questions, and when you ask these questions you tend to find the answers in AI. And so my undergraduate 25 years ago was in AI at UCL. I was very, very lucky to be one of the people that did an actual degree in this field.
Right, and most people would think about philosophy and psychology when you ask these big questions. Maybe some history, some mathematics, right? Like why computational science, in your opinion?
Well, my degree was actually computer science with cognitive science, so it was linked to psychology, and you do logic and all that kind of stuff. So you cover a lot of the courses from philosophy, and I think a lot of people who are interested in knowing themselves end up reading philosophy as an extracurricular activity. So philosophy is a subject of mine that I enjoy reading outside of my academic pursuit. But I guess we can use computation to look at and answer lots of questions. So we can look at how the world solves problems. We can then mimic those in algorithms. We can, assuming that people think that everything that is to do with consciousness is within our mind and body. In theory, that can be computationally modeled. There are, we've all seen The Matrix, and there are more and more pieces of evidence to suggest that this might be a simulation that we're living in, so computation, understanding information, understanding data, I think is a really good lens to think about these questions. I heard of, I can't remember who said this. Maybe it was Dijkstra or something, but that telescopes are as much to do with astronomy as computers are to computer science. So people think that computer science is to do with computers. It's not. It's to do with computation. It's to do with information and algorithms and essentially how the universe works.
Right. It's like our number one invention to accelerate the transition of packets of information, and probably the fastest way to lead experiments and to scale on these experiments and to accelerate and make everything bigger, faster, sort of. So that's why you think that this could be the number one factor to understanding consciousness. It would be the number one pathway to get there, in your opinion.
Well, I think neural networks are a network of computational activity, and through that computational activity, consciousness emerges, or our ability to recognize objects and to understand language and to create world models and to understand self. And so assuming again that all of that is happening within the mind, then that network, that activity, that information processing can be modeled by a machine. And one of the reasons why I started Conscium was we know that large language models are horrendously energy inefficient. They require lots of data to learn. They learn very, very slowly. Our brains operate on the power of a light bulb. We learn incredibly quickly. We only need one piece of data before we know what things are. So there are many innovations that need to get created before we get to the point where we have machines operating like biological brains. That said, I think actually there's some stuff that's coming out of academia that I've been tracking for the past few decades since doing my PhD modeling bumblebee brains 20 years ago that are called neuromorphic technologies. And those neuromorphic technologies are most likely going to be the brains that operate robots. And if you design those systems in a way that have them always on, learning, adapting, you run the risk then of them potentially becoming sentient. And Conscium is trying to sort of platformize neuromorphics, and then it's also trying to verify and validate, are these agents or AIs conscious? They have morals? Do they have the ability to feel, or even do the job that we want them to do? So I think it's going to be an exciting 5-10 years when we start to see AIs moving from our machines to the physical world.
And what's your definition of consciousness?
Well, there are multiple definitions of consciousness. That's the problem, and I think that if I'm honest, I think academics will be arguing about this question for the next 200 years, and by the time that happens, we'll already have machines that are conscious. I know that's a circular argument, but there is a term called mind crime, which was coined by Nick Bostrom, which is if we run the risk of essentially building machines that can suffer, feel. And if we don't know that, we could be putting them in horrible situations. So we actually have a duty of care now to not just to human beings and to animals, but we potentially have a duty of care to machines. I'm actually less interested in the definitions around consciousness. I found even with AI, although I've been talking about one specific definition of intelligence for many, many years, definitions are not really helpful in the practical world. What I'm interested in is can a machine suffer? Can it feel anxiety? Can it feel joy, pain, suffering, all that kind of stuff? So those are really the questions I want to explore. In terms of definitions of consciousness, rather than me, giving you multiple definitions, I'd highly recommend. There's a couple of books out there. So one is by one of our advisors called Mark Solms, which is called Hidden Spring, which is a phenomenal book, which gives a real good insight into these key questions. And another book by Anil Seth called Being You. So I think those two are really good books to start with to explore some of these concepts of consciousness. And again, less concerned really about the definitions. I'm more interested in how we can create it, if we can detect it, and if we can actually build machines that are safe for not only themselves, but also for humanity.
But how can you build something if you don't have like a clear objective in mind, which is like a definition, right? Like I think that's like a brain pathway. Ultimately, your brain needs to go there, but yeah, I think we need like some kind of definition to understand and scale science. I understand that definitions are broad in society, right? Like and a lot of scientists use that to the detriment of other people. It's like, oh, I know this definition, but yeah, you invented it, right? I think consciousness, it's very advanced intelligence. What is intelligence? It's like the ability to achieve your goals in the quickest, most efficient way possible, I would guess. Consciousness in machines, it's quite interesting, and I think it's directly related to the definition of pain and if they feel anxiety and all of that. Like, what would be anxiety in a machine? Would it be like twitchy electricity, and would it be like I don't know, like GPUs overheating? They're definitely feeling a lot of pain nowadays.
Well, these are questions that we need to ask. Well, and so I think you're right. There is a distinction between intelligence and consciousness. The definition of intelligence that I really subscribe to and have done for a long, long time is very simple. It's goal-directed adaptive behavior. And going back to your point, the more quickly you can adapt to achieve your goal, the more intelligent you are. And actually, interestingly, there's a theory in consciousness, the field of consciousness called the free energy principle. And the free energy principle, again, was coined by one of our advisors called Carl Friston. And I guess the idea is that you have an expectation about the world, and then you act with respect to that expectation. And if that expectation is met, then you don't really need to be aware or conscious of it. If it's not met, then you need to interrogate it. And there are different levels of interrogation, and then because you need to change your world model. And some people might argue that self-awareness, language, or metacognition are consciousness. And I think actually there's lots of different things that you need to bring together to determine whether something's conscious or not. But arguably, insects are conscious because they can still adapt to a changing world. They can interrogate that delta. They might not interrogate that delta in language or in ways that we do, but they are aware in some cases of a delta. So I think you're right. We need to establish some definitions, and Conscium is essentially sort of documenting a handful of the leading definitions. The next question then is, what are the behavioral markers that you want to look for with respect to that then being conscious? And then what tests can you come up with to determine those behavioral markers? So for example, let's assume that recognizing yourself in a mirror is one aspect of consciousness, self-awareness. There is a concept called the mirror test, where you put yourself or an animal in front of a mirror with some dirt on it, and it does this instead of doing this. And I guess the point there is that there's like 8 species of animal that pass the mirror test, and but that's only one test for one type of behavioral marker. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to document kind of a whole gamut of behavioral markers that we can use, not just to test for animal or biological consciousness, but to test for digital consciousness.
Right. And to the pain question, like I understand the machine's right thing, by the way. Like I don't think a lot of people get that. You seem at the other extreme of it. I thought I was like pretty high saying that machine should have right, but like I'm pretty sure you get these odd looks at a lot of times. So pain, like the pain, my mind cannot wrap around that one. Like how can machines feel pain? Define that one. And
I'm still it's something I still think deeply about. So I'm still trying to convince myself what does it even mean for a human to feel pain, right? What does it mean?
Well, that's simple. It's like or nerves signaling that there's something, and then our mind interpret that as
exactly.
we need to get away from that. It's
exactly.
it's not like real, quote unquote, right? Like as an Ironman, as an ultra runner, I have a gigantic pain tolerance, but that's what it is.
Let me give you a thought experiment then. So imagine I build a brain that operates a drone, and I teach that brain, and I run that brain in a simulator, and I train that brain to have the intent to forage for, I don't know, berries on certain trees. So you're through the evolutionary process, I can reward you if you have collected berries and done a very good job, and I've punished you if you haven't. So the intent, the innate instinct of this brain is to go and forage for berries. Now imagine if I put that in a drone, and by the way, that brain has access to different sensors in terms of the health of its battery and its propellers and all that kind of stuff. And let's imagine that drone then hits a tree and damages itself and can't fly. So it now can't achieve its intent. Its battery is getting very low. Its propeller is broken. Does that drone then have the ability to feel anxious?
No, it's just like a human concept, right? Like anxiety and pain, like machines that would have signals that something is broken, but pain in us humans and creatures have been a construct of intelligence so that we could survive, right? Like, my finger's hurting, I won't punch anymore.
Yeah, so the drone wants to survive to achieve its goal, and now it can't survive to achieve its goal. And all of the signals that it's getting from its body are going into its brain and saying, you're not going to be able to now achieve your goal. In the same way that you just said, all it is an actual signal going to your brain that's then interpreted in some way. So it's a similar thought experiment. And again,
it's just that we're humanizing these machines, right? Like it's just that we're humanizing them. I don't think they would have pain unless we hard code it into them. Would AGI have pain? Probably. Do you need pain to be really sentient? Is another question.
And AGI again is not hard coded; it's learned, based on
Yeah. That's what I'm
experience.
saying. Maybe it would have pain, like I think, or maybe not. Maybe, like you said, it's just like an alien version of intelligence, and us humans were just one version of it.
So these are the questions that I don't think that there's any definitive answer for right now, but I think that we actually need to lean into and answer them. Hence the reason why I'm now investing, a large portion of my resources to, I start Conscium is a commercial vehicle to explore some of these ideas and to exploit some of these technologies that I think are going to be very valuable. I did also kick off a charity called Prism, which is the Partnership for Research into Sentient Machines, and that's now leaning into questions of should AIs have rights? What happens if people attribute consciousness to things that are not conscious? What happens if people build relationships with those things? So that's more kind of the sort of the theoretical stuff. And I've also just funded a movie where essentially a robot has committed a crime, and rather than the owner of that robot, the builder of that robot being responsible, the builder said, look, we believe this machine is conscious and therefore needs to be tried with respect to the rights of some of humans. So I'm all in on trying to explore these questions of machine consciousness, because I think that, what was science fiction 10 years ago are now going to become a reality over the next 5-10 years.
Right. Is also pain and anxiety bad? Like, as entrepreneurs, we get tons of pain, and it's just like how you interpret it. You can also control your anxiety, and I think anxiety in the end is cortisol. You need like a bit of that. You stress. So
yeah,
I just question.
These are I think there's probably too much pain and suffering in the world, but of course even if I argue
There's
that,
like toxic pain, right? Like pain that you don't control and that is imposed against your will, sort of.
And I'd also argue that these questions have been debated for a long time in philosophy, and should you, if you have the choice to live in a utopia where you're always happy, is that the right thing to do? But I think one of the arguments of AI is that if we got the timing right, we can free people from paid work, and create a world of abundance, and allow people to then do whatever they want. And I do believe actually people will find purpose in that world. And people do say to me, Daniel, what would happen, in a world without suffering? I'd argue there'll always be suffering. There'll always be mates that you want that don't want you. There'll be experiences that you want to have that you can't have. There'll be, if everybody had a helicopter, we'd all be arguing over who leaves first. So there'll always be suffering. I think there'll always be some sort of competition, and therefore cortisol and all that kind of stuff comes in. But I think there's too much unnecessary suffering in the world, and what I'd like to see is AI address that problem.
Yeah, I think suffering is hard coded into us. I think we'll be able to modify that DNA and probably even Neuralink yourself in some time and sort of reach escape velocity on that level. Do I think competition will stop? No, I still think that will be a fact, and there will be a bit of suffering, like you said. UBI, yeah, sure. I do think on a short term, and bots, I do think they're going to work for humans in the next couple of decades. But once they're sentient, like what will happen? I think there will be bot hierarchies as well, like like Blade Runner style, and some bots that are in slave owned sort of, and others that are just like humanoids and very intelligent, very successful. You mentioned simulation, Jerry. What have been the latest evidence that we're going through that? My personal anecdotal evidence is that we're reaching escape velocity and longevity, plus we're finding out about AGI in my lifetime, which seems like crazy, what are the odds? But yeah, what is the scientific evidence on that?
I don't know. I think so. There's a book that I recommend called Genesis by Craig Mundy and Eric Schmidt and a few others. And I think the sort of the expectation is that in the next 5 or so years we will achieve AGI. So machine as smart as all of us, we'll probably have
Well, they
solved.
already are.
Well, not
Already way
necessarily.
smarter than you and I, like
Well,
in 99% of things.
in some things, yes, but there's two real definitions of AGI. So one is a machine that's as smart as every sort of expert on the planet, and the reality is that they are not as smart as a professor or a deep expert in something. But the point is that in the next 3-5 years, we'll reach the point where it's as smart as everything. But the second definition is a machine that's as cognitively and physically capable of as an average human, so it can go and run and cut hair and do that kind of stuff. I think we'll achieve the first definition probably faster than the second one. The natural thing, by the way, you would say to a professor, AI is go and build something smarter than you, and then you get a fast takeoff, you get a super intelligence very, very, very quickly. So I actually think we'll get to super intelligence in the next 5-10 years, which by definition we can't see beyond because it's a singularity. But in terms of evidence of us living in a simulation, that I mean, I don't stay as close to this as I should. I don't think that longevity is necessarily evidence. I think AI is able to monitor ourselves and suggest what genes we need to focus on.
Well, if I can live forever, I can accumulate immense wealth and knowledge and all of that, and I could just live forever. That's like my consciousness forever extended.
Well, I guess it depends on how the universe might end, and because the universe might end at some point for some reason. So forever is a long time, but certainly we're gonna in theory achieve longevity, escape velocity, or whatever it's called in the next 10, 20, 30 years, which is very exciting because I'm very interested also in longevity, and I want to live as long as possible. But I think in terms of kind of evidence of us living in a simulation, I mean, I always there's two things. I always go back to the double slit experiment where if you send a photon down two slits, it will operate as a wave. If you then look at which slit it goes down, it will collapse into a discrete photon. And the point there is that if you, for things that you don't need to know exactly where they are, they operate probabilistically. For things that you need to know where they are, they operate discretely. And if I was to design a universe, if I was a superintelligence, then that's how I would design it. I would design it in a way where things that I don't,
so that people can't understand shit.
No, well, not really. It's just that I would design it in a way that I don't. Computationally, it would be much more efficient if some things operated probabilistically, the things that I don't really care about because I'm not touching it, versus the things I do care about because I do touch it and I need to know where they are. They can then collapse into something that's discrete. Then that's a smart way of designing a simulation, because just knowing where everything is would be computationally unnecessary. So that for me is some evidence, and people can review that. But there is I think there's some recent findings that they've looked at the edge of a black hole, and they've seen that it has a certain structure, and that structure is very similar to currently how we are stabilizing qubits. So there's this interesting, I think, like hexagonal structure that's being used to stabilize qubits. One of the challenges with qubits is that they don't last very long and they're erroneous, and this certain structure stabilizes them. And so there's some parallels or some suggestion that this is some quantum simulation, because we're seeing this very similar pattern. But again, I'm not a physicist, and I'm not as close to this as I should be. But I think it was Nick Bostrom that wrote that there's a 1 in a billion chance that this is not a simulation. I can't remember his argument for that, but it doesn't matter anyway, I don't think. And we still feel, we still love, we still enjoy a glass of wine, and I think that's what we should continue to do.
And if you would have designed such a world, what would be your objective?
Well, do you know what? If I did ever meet our maker, the
Or
superintelligence,
master?
yeah, well, I'm not sure it would even care about us, if I'm honest. In the same way that you
Yeah,
don't care
no,
about your,
they probably don't operate on these
yeah,
concepts.
you don't care about your gut bacteria. I mean, you probably do care about your gut bacteria if you're interested in longevity, but most people don't care about their gut bacteria in the same way that a superintelligence probably wouldn't care about us. But I would be upset that it constructed a universe that has suffering. I know that we just described, suffering as being just electrical signals and our interpretation. And I guess to when we're looking at that drone that I talked about, we can just say, well, it's just electrical signals, and it's just it's just a machine. It can't really suffer, but we do suffer. We do feel pain, and if I was to design a universe, I would not want to have the amount of suffering that we have in this universe, even if it was just computational.
Yeah, me, I love paints. You're just not talking to the right person. Like, if you talk to ultra runners
Look,
or
I'm
Ironmans or Goggins, like that's a religion. Like me, I find a lot of meaning in pain.
sure, sure. I'm
It's
not
brought
saying
gigantic value in my life.
I'm
So,
saying that there's too much unnecessary suffering. The pain I'm talking about
okay.
are, my cat's just found out he's got it's gonna die soon, right? That I've got
Ooh,
people die. You've got
yeah,
children
that's
dying
hard.
of children
No,
dying of
that's real suffering right there.
children dying of disease. They've got children dying of hunger. We've got it.
Yeah,
There's too. It's just that's just not cool. It's not
right.
cool.
No, for sure. We're gonna do another episode soon on UBI and probably how to fix that. That would be cool. Where can people find out more about you till then?
I on LinkedIn, Daniel Hulme, or email me, daniel@satalia.com. I don't think UBI has necessarily been proven to work economically. I think that we need something to potentially take the edge off of what could be, mass technological employment. The worry is that if that happens very quickly, we get social unrest, and I do think we need to lean into that problem. And I'm not sure that UBI is necessarily a long-term solution, but I do think we need to solve it.
Yeah, yeah. More on that later. So that was Dan and Charles.